he said, "You've won a Nobel Prize." And I just thought, well, that is crazy. That's just ridiculous. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, on the west coast of the U.S. I have two brothers. I'm in the middle of two brothers, and had a very nice childhood. Not too much drama. We lived in basically the same house the whole time I was growing up, and I went to Catholic schools for grade school and high school. And I always liked math and science, and just kind of science of all types in general. I didn't have like a particular thing that I was really into, but I was a good student and a good kid. And in high school, I tried to be athletic. I was on the track and cross country teams, but always pretty bad. And I liked basketball and volleyball and stuff, but it was always just for fun, not super competitive. And then when I just, started making plans to go to university, I really wanted to go to the University of Washington, which is up in Seattle, so just a few hours away from Portland. But what was really attractive to me, I think, was the size of it. It's a really huge university, because I was really feeling like high school was getting very small. It was a pretty small school I was in, and I wanted something bigger and in a bigger city. And so University of Washington was a great experience. I loved it. It had so much going on all the time, and so many resources and things for students. Well, when I started university, I really thought I wanted to go to medical school. My paternal grandfather was a doctor and surgeon, which I found really, really intriguing, and I really wanted to help people. I also went through a period of time when I really wanted to be a veterinarian, because I loved animals, and also I really wanted to do that sort of caring and healing. But sort of later in my years at University of Washington, I was in a upper level genetics class, and the professor, Dr. Sandler, he was so enthralling. The lectures were just amazing. I mean, I knew I really liked genetics, but the way he taught, he was also telling stories, basically telling stories about the people who made the discoveries and all this kind of thing. And so the genetics was exciting to me. And then I had the very good fortune of being able to do an undergraduate research project in his lab. And research, honestly, was not something I had ever even considered. I didn't have exposure to any, there was nobody I knew who was a researcher, and it just wasn't anything that crossed my mind. But it was like the minute I walked into that laboratory and saw, there was just something about the environment of people who were so into what they were doing, so excited about their projects, but also having a good time. It was a really close-knit group. And Dr. Sandler was such a mentor and teacher and real, cheerleader for people. He really took care of his graduate students and his postdocs and made sure that they, were ready for the next stage. So it was really through discussions with him that I decided I wanted to apply to graduate school, and that sort of, launched the whole career in research. But it was really kind of a late decision, I guess, but I don't have no regrets. It was a good way to go. The thing that drew me into science and research was just having a reason to really focus on something, for one thing. So, and not everything is as interesting as everything else. You have to find the thing that is of most interest. But I like the idea of really diving deep into something, and just science in general, I guess I feel like is really a process of seeking the the truth, I guess. You would hope that the things you learn are really the way things are, as opposed to something that's based on a belief where there's really no proof. I like the idea of something, really concrete and coming up with a discovery that proves something. The other thing that is exciting about research, I guess, is that, it's also something that makes it frustrating, is that you're never really done. You find something, it's a discovery, and that always leads to the next hypothesis, the next question that you need an answer for. So it, is a constant process of discovery, which is also frustrating at times because you don't ever really finish anything. Oh, it's absolutely, collaboration is key. I think it may depend on the particular field that you're in, but at least in the areas that I have had experience with, collaboration is absolutely important. I think both from the point of view of just having more people to share ideas with and kind of bounce things off back and forth, but also, honestly, you can't be an expert in everything, and so you need to bring in the different expertise, and I think it just makes it more fun as well, as long as you have, as long as you have good collaborators that you get along with. And I have been very fortunate to have interacted with a lot of really great people. One person can't do it all, and I was very lucky to have a couple of really top-notch research assistants in the lab, who had magic fingers when it came to just doing the molecular biology work in the lab, but also, they were just so smart and quick, and I think always felt like they could make suggestions for how, experiments should go and that sort of thing. So I was never one who, had a set way that things needed to be done, because I really trusted that they also were perfectly capable of, reading the literature, coming up with new ideas for ways to do things. And then besides that small core team, there were a number of other really talented people in the lab as well that, they would contribute, their particular expertise when we needed it for a short time, that kind of thing. So it was a very really open environment where there was no sense of, trying to hold on to your own little domain, or, no competition between groups or anything like that. It was really, which I think again goes back to the idea that in this biotech company, it was the whole organization had a single goal, and that's what we needed to do. You couldn't have single people who were looking to outshine, whereas in an academic environment, there is more, I think there is more emphasis on, truly kind of promoting yourself, especially when you're a graduate student or a postdoc, because you must go out into the world and get a competitive position somewhere. And so it's, not uncommon at all for there to be a little bit more of a competition between people, and really, kind of protecting your domain and needing to excel, and that's fine in some situations. But I think in this environment where I found myself working with Fred, it really was, we would all succeed if we all worked together on trying to achieve these goals. I think for sure a diverse group amongst your collaborators is key, and I think the diversity comes from both scientific expertise, but also just the background of people. It really, one thing that nobody ever told me when I went into science is how important personality is, because I guess when I went into science, I kind of had this sense that it's just based on the truth. It's, a fact is a fact, and science is going to happen the way it should. But in fact, there's a lot of influence from the people that you're working with and the way that discoveries are conveyed to each other and among a group, and just how smoothly a project moves forward depends on kind of the personalities of the people who are working there. So that was like a huge awakening for me when I finally realized that, gosh, personalities really make a big difference. And so again, it's important to collaborate, but you also need to find the right kind of mix of people, and you need to be a good team player yourself. The characteristics of a successful scientist would include being curious about things and very persistent. A successful scientist can't be afraid of kind of losing their way or things not working every once in a while, because that's just a fact of life in research. So you have to have persistence and courage to keep moving forward, and then, that sense of curiosity is really important. My advice to young researchers, I think one of the most important things is to keep an open mind, both when it comes to the science itself. So, of course, discoveries come from places where you never imagined, so you have to keep an open mind and keep your eyes open to different pathways, I guess, as you're journeying through a topic of interest, but also an open mind in terms of kind of career path and, where you go in life. And I would say I'm a pretty good example of that, of one who has kind of changed directions and not stayed on one single track. And I think that's really important, because I worry about especially young people who think they have a really strong sense of where they want to be and where they're going. And you just want to, because sometimes things, doors open off to the side a little bit, and there's nothing wrong with exploring different options. Absolutely. I have a very strong belief that we need to keep investing in basic research because, just the nature of science, everything builds on everything else. And I think you can't always see the value of something at the time that you're investing in it and working in it. But I would say that over time, over the last couple hundred years or whatever, we certainly have seen evidence that discoveries that you didn't know how important they were become important because they form the basis of, the next discovery. And so it's absolutely critical, I think, that we keep finding ways of using public funds or philanthropic funds, or, there has to be a way to keep those basic discoveries coming. It's probably a small subset of those basic discoveries that then get translated into, real life applications that help people, but you can't predict ahead of time which ones of those are the ones that are really going to be, winners in the end. So. Yeah, so I went to graduate school at Princeton University, and again, I would say my other most important mentor in my career is Shirley Tillman, who I did my PhD with, and really learned. Well, she was such a good role model especially for young women, but really anybody in her orbit. Was very lucky to have her there. She's an exceptional, scientist, made us work hard, but, funny and warm and a great cheerleader. So I did my thesis work and then did a postdoctoral training period up in Toronto. And it was kind of during that time, during my postdoc time, where I was doing work that was very interesting to me, and I was surrounded by all these graduate students and postdocs who were also very enthusiastic about what they were doing. And for the most part, people were really headed towards academic careers, I would say. But I started to feel like for myself, I would be more satisfied if I was in a situation where I was doing something that had a had a more direct application to human health mostly. And so the idea of a biotechnology company was very attractive to me. And this was an exciting time in science, I think, in the early 90s. Kind of the concept of the Human Genome Project was really taking off, and new technologies and approaches to genomics was new, and that was very exciting to me. And so when I had this opportunity to work for a small company in Seattle whose whole kind of vision was around using genetics and gene discovery to find new drug targets, that seemed like a really nice fit. And it was definitely, I always felt like I was really in a place where I had the best of both worlds, where we were doing really interesting basic research, that I thought was as exciting as anything I would be doing in an academic lab, but it was within the context of an organization who had to really stick with a goal. I mean, everybody was working towards the same goal of finding new drug targets that would eventually be hopefully developed into drugs. And, we weren't around that long. I started working there in 1994. I think the labs had only been in place since 93. And then our doors were closed in 2004. Unfortunately, just, that's how business goes, basically. During that period of time when I was working as a bench scientist at Darwin Molecular, I was working super hard, to the exclusion of most everything else in my life. And so when the doors closed in 2004, it was kind of a forced reset where I really had, and looking back, I am thankful actually that I had the opportunity to really sort of reconsider how things were going in my life. And I took some time to kind of do some different things to see really where I wanted to fit. And I did work again at another small biotech company and lost that job as well because of a big layoff, kind of across the board. They cut a lot of people. And now I'm in a more academic setting, but I'm also working more from a project management and program management point of view, which suits me because I not only intellectually it's interesting to be a part of a project kind of from a 30,000-foot level or bird's eye view of a project and making sure that all the different parts are working together and moving forward. But it's also the kind of position where I have a lot of flexibility, and it's made it easier to balance work and other things in life. And I think, and I just realized that was really important to me. So it's been a satisfying way to go, I think, career-wise. And I know plenty of other women scientists who have, it's hard, but they have found ways to balance work and life and, really challenging and high pressure jobs. But I realized I wanted to be able to do both well. Yeah. Oh, as a person, Fred is great. He's become a good friend of mine over the years, and working with him during that 9 or 10 year period was really great because he's just very personable and funny and warm, and the people who worked for him were always extremely loyal to him, which because he really cared about people and really did what he could to, make sure that they were moving forward in their careers and stuff. And even as the leader of that immunology team at Darwin, he was in there still working at the bench himself. So he was, day to day, he was really interacting on a very, real level with the folks in his team. I was in a different group. I was in the genomics molecular biology group, and there was a lot of interaction between the groups. I mean, it wasn't a very big company, everybody knew each other, but on a real day-to-day basis, we interacted a lot. And he's just very, he's very humble and very generous with his time. And he is a very good collaborator, which is, I think he's a very good role model for that kind of really honestly wanting to, take advantage of the experience that other people bring. I mean, he really sees the value in, more brains is better than one brain. And he's, very easy to work with. I am motivated by a sense of helping people and supporting people. And if that means, contributing my intellect and expertise on something, that's great, then that's the way I will help. But if it means, just being supportive in some other, kind of non-scientific way as well, that's also really important to me. So yes, I would say I'm just a caring person who, I feel like it brings me great satisfaction to help others to succeed. I enjoy being in the outdoors, so I enjoy like walking, hiking, biking. I don't always find as much time doing those things as I would like. But I also, enjoy reading, and I like films and baking. I would like to spend more time in the kitchen at some point. Again, it's always been a balance between work and family. And I'm just recently my children have, left the home, although I'm still, I think about them all the time and do what I can to help them out into the world. But so that still takes time. And traveling, I would love to travel more as well. And so I will, these things. Creative spark, I would say baking is a place where I feel creative. Sewing, I also enjoy sewing, and so kind of designing and trying to solve a problem. It's usually a problem that I'm trying to solve, constructing a certain, turning something into a three-dimensional article of clothing or whatever. And that's, and I do like the problem-solving side of that. Yes, the morning of October 6th is etched upon my mind. Yeah, so the calls started coming in at about 1 a.m., and I was sound asleep, and my phone was near my bed, and it just buzzed, with a phone call. And I looked, just looked at it, and it was this, long international number, and it did say Sweden. Every once in a while, you get the weird call from Nigeria or somewhere, and I'm not answering that. And in fact, these days, I don't answer the phone if it's not a number I recognize. I figure they'll leave a message if they really need to get hold of me. So I put the phone down, and then a couple minutes later, it buzzed again, and I thought, well, that's very, usually the scam artists are not that persistent, but it was 1 a.m. I was sleepy. So I put the phone in do not disturb mode and went back to sleep, and didn't realize until, hours later that it was also happening with my husband's phone on the other side of the bed. He was also getting calls, and he also turned his phone off. And so a couple hours later, I was aware of some activity, and I think my husband got up and he knocked something over. He knocked a lamp over or something, but he said, it's okay, and he went out, left the room, and then I heard voices, and I thought, he's on the phone or what's going on? And then there was a woman's voice, and I thought, what's going on? And next thing I know, he came back in the bedroom and turned on the big overhead lamp, and he said, you've won a Nobel Prize. And I just thought, well, that is crazy. That's just ridiculous. And he said, no, you come into the living room. There's this young woman, she's got a couple big cameras slung around her neck. Her boss called her up and, at 2 a.m. or something and said, you must go to this address and get pictures of the reaction, but she was the one who actually had to tell us why she was on our front porch at 3:30 a.m. So she was taking a risk, being knocking on doors of strangers at that time of day. But so, yeah, the only way my husband would let her in the front door is if she held up her phone to the window in our door, that had the press release. So that was really, it took a couple hours, took a couple hours before I kind of started to realize that this was not a hoax. It was not a scam. I had Thomas Perlman on the phone and Adam Smith, and it was really, that was an amazing morning. But it has been an amazing thing over the last 2 months, since the prize was awarded. I have spent a lot of time in the last 2 months really kind of taking stock of what has happened in the last 20 years, since we published papers, and to really see how the field, that particular field in immunology, has really taken off. And now, so satisfying to see that things are actually being turned into potential therapies and treatments. And while I am not, directly involved in that work these days, it is really satisfying, and it's really humbling to think, that, what I would consider a kind of a small part of the puzzle I had a role in, and that's tremendously gratifying. But it's overwhelming because it's nothing that I would have predicted at the time that we did the work. I knew it was interesting. I knew it was really interesting to me, and it was interesting to our team, but there was no sense of, what's this going to do for the world? It's been amazing. And I also have heard from an awful lot of people. I get emails from people who oftentimes is just, thank you for the work you've done. But there's also an awful lot of messages from people who are really suffering, or someone in their family is suffering from autoimmune disease or whatever. And they're, begging for help. And that's hard because I am not in a position there isn't any, I'm not a medical person, and I'm not even working in that field of immunology. And so that's been really hard because it's, on the one hand, we have contributed to these great advances, but, the job is not done yet. We're not just curing people of their autoimmune diseases. So that's hard, but it makes me hopeful that we're on the right track, and the field will continue to make big advances, and that's great.